One major development going on now involves more to do with Rachel Zegler and her attitude towards South Park Studios and Paramount after learning about what they are planning for their upcoming special called the DEI Special.
The last time I had the dream, I was walking down the school hallway, and that's when I started to notice that something's wrong. Everyone I cared about has been systematically replaced. And finally, I want to scream, and I'm like, why are they replacing every single character with someone who is diverse?
If you thought Disney's live-action remakes couldn't get more dramatic, think again. The controversy swirling around Rachel Zegler's upcoming Snow White has reached boiling point, fueled by intense fan backlash, corporate scuffles, and a blistering parody from none other than South Park. Buckle up, because this saga is about to get wild.
Our rights are on the line, folks.
Bitch! The right to buy Cosby sweaters?
Come on.
That's the face of a
blue.
serial killer.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
Let's dive right into the storm surrounding Rachel Zegler, Disney, and the reimagined Snow White. When news first broke that Disney planned a new live-action adaptation of its 1937 classic, the response was mixed but mostly curious. After all, Disney had reworked classics before some reboots had thrived, while others sparked fierce debate. Yet, no one quite anticipated the level of controversy that would follow this particular project. Rachel Zegler, celebrated for her strong performances elsewhere, found herself under the brightest of spotlights. The moment she signed on for the iconic role of Snow White, a wave of opinions emerged about whether it was possible or even advisable to modernize one of Disney's most revered fairy tales.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie. 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
The spark that ignited all these discussions came from Zegler's own remarks and interviews. As soon as she started talking about how the 1937 film was outdated, fans of the original grew wary. She described the classic as unrepresentative of modern sensibilities and hinted that the new version would overhaul core story elements. To some, this was bold and exciting. Too many traditionalists, however, it felt like a dismissal of a cinematic landmark, the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Aside from being the first feature-length animated film in the United States, holds a special place in the hearts of generations. Any tinkering with its timeless innocence risked fan outrage. From the outset, Zegler seemed unfazed by the backlash. She doubled down, mentioning that her Snow White wouldn't be saved by the prince, and that the story would center on leadership and independence. Once those remarks circulated, critics began dissecting her words, accusing her of misunderstanding the original fairy tale's cultural impact. Memes sprang up, hashtags trended, and heated commentary filled social media, while some younger fans applauded her, praising the idea of a more proactive princess. Older audiences worried that a beloved classic was being twisted into something unrecognizable.
Even if everything worked perfectly, it would have been almost impossible for this movie to succeed because you're comparing it to one of the most beloved films of all time and a truly groundbreaking movie.
Before the controversy could settle, word spread about possible internal disagreements on set. Gal Gadot was cast as the evil queen, a move that initially excited fans. However, rumors soon emerged that Gadot and Zegler were not exactly on friendly terms. At one award ceremony, the pair avoided any real interaction and stood awkwardly apart. Whispers of tension ballooned into talk of a disastrous production, with insiders claiming there were extensive reshoots, rewrites, and frantic efforts to salvage the story's third act. Disney executives apparently struggled to find the perfect balance between paying homage to the 1937 original and updating the story to reflect modern perspectives.
You don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced,
White! He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
Thing that was trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry.
Meanwhile, Bob Iger, the returning CEO of Disney, had plenty of other issues to handle. Underperforming releases, worries about Marvel's future, and the challenge of reboot culture in general. The Snow White project went from a straightforward live-action remake to a swirling maelstrom of negativity that threatened to overshadow the entire Disney brand. While many factors fed into this meltdown, Rachel Zegler's interview stood front and center as the lightning rod for public outrage.
It was supposed to come out like a year and a half ago, and then we went after them so hard because of their variety of ridiculous sins that they actually went into full-scale reshoots on Snow White when we announced that we had a competitor.
Then came the South Park angle of development that would take the fiasco from simmering controversy to full-blown cultural spectacle. In a new special titled The Day Special, a follow-up to the Panderverse, which had already satirized various hot-button issues. South Park co-creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone took aim at the Snow White drama. They introduced a caricature of Rachel Zegler, depicted as berating everyone around her and proclaiming that her new Snow White would rescue society from old-fashioned notions. It was brief but sharp, lampooning her real-life interviews especially, those in which she derided the 1937 film as archaic. The internet had a field day. South Park parodies aren't new. Over the years, the show has taken swipes at everyone from politicians to celebrities to major corporations. But the speed at which this particular sketch went viral was startling. Clip after clip circulated on social media, comparing Zegler's real interview quotes with the cartoon's over-the-top depiction. People pointed out the uncanny similarities, noting how close South Park got to her actual tone, phrasing, and emphasis on modernizing the story almost overnight. Rachel Zegler found herself in an even harsher spotlight.
And this started with the movie star Rachel Zegler, who I believe would be categorized as a loudmouth dope.
Insiders soon leaked that Zegler was livid about the South Park mockery. She allegedly felt to pile more ridicule onto an already tense situation, making her appear like a dramatic diva who had zero respect for the Disney classic. Reports suggested she wanted to release a statement clarifying her stance, but Disney apparently discouraged her from doing so, fearing that any response would only feed the media frenzy. By that time, fans had heard from multiple sources that the studio was already limiting her promotional appearances, presumably to keep her from sparking yet more controversy in interviews. Those canceled appearances became major talking points. Official Disney statements cited scheduling conflicts, but industry insiders insisted it was strategy, better to keep Zegler away from cameras and microphones than risk more incendiary sound bites. Critics saw this as the corporation trying to muzzle its own leading lady, indicating deep rifts between Rachel Zegler and the Disney higher-ups. Some speculated that she was furious behind the scenes, feeling the studio should defend her especially, when her version of Snow White was meant to be at the forefront of the marketing push.
As an actor, you don't get to dictate anything. You don't get to dictate if a film actually happens. You don't get to dictate when it is shot, how it is shot, if you can ever speak about it to the public. You are simply just there to show up and say your lines and look the way they want you to look.
All this corporate tension seeped into the public eye. People started to ask whether Disney's approach to remaking classics was inherently flawed. Over the past few years, they had produced a string of live-action adaptations with varying degrees of success. But fans accused the studio of missing the spark that once made Disney's magic so universal. To those who loved the original Snow White, hearing it described as archaic and problematic felt jarring, like the film's own actress was belittling it from within. Younger viewers, meanwhile, argued that times have changed and that an updated princess who leads rather than waits for a prince is absolutely necessary. However, even some who appreciate modern spins criticized Zegler's tone. The sense was that she sounded dismissive, almost mocking, when discussing how she planned to fix the source material, whether that was truly her intent or the result of a few awkwardly phrased remarks. The impression stuck. When South Park came in swinging, it merely crystallized the perception that Zegler had lost perspective, acting as if it was her personal mission to save the classic from itself, all while overshadowing co-stars and ignoring the larger creative team.
Yeah, the entire film's about a love story. It's about a love story because that's what the point of the film is, and I'm sorry that chivalry and a man pursuing you is now deemed as stalking, which now it's kind of making sense why men are opting out of the dating scene.
Within Disney's offices, rumors of daily emergency meetings multiplied. Bob Iger was said to be scrambling to contain the negative hype. The film was months away from release, yet it was already bogged down by enough bad press to sink any normal production on top of it all. The tension between Zegler and Gal Gadot hinted that reshoots might drastically alter certain sequences in order to appease the lead actress. If the set was that fraught from the beginning, it was no surprise the final cut might be in jeopardy. To make matters worse, some fans felt that even the standard aspects of the Snow White mythos were being trampled. There were rumblings that the Seven Dwarfs would be replaced or reimagined in a way that drastically deviated from the original. The prince's role was apparently being minimized or axed in favor of a new storyline combined with Zegler's comments. It all reeked of a production trying hard to distance itself from what made the 1937 film a cherished piece of cinematic history. Again, modern updates are nothing new. Disney has certainly done so with recent remakes, but Snow White stands on a pedestal as the film that launched the studio's animated empire. For many, messing with it felt almost sacrilegious.
In addition to that, there was already an uproar about her being cast as Snow White because she is not Caucasian, she is a Latina, she is half Colombian, and so people were like, why were you cast in the first place? We just had a black Little Mermaid, now we're having a Latina Snow White, and she is literally called Snow White. This doesn't make sense.
As the controversies piled up, the South Park parody drew even more global attention. Reviewers and commentators jumped on the story Snow White fiasco lampoon on South Park. Read headlines across entertainment sites, memes featuring the cartoon version of Rachel Zegler circulated on every major social platform. Some fans, who had been only mildly interested in the film, suddenly took notice. They started investigating the real interviews that had inspired the satire. In many cases, they found that the show's portrayal, while exaggerated, was uncomfortably close to Zegler's actual statements. This only fueled the anger of those who felt she was disrespecting an animated classic. Behind the scenes, Rachel Zegler reportedly felt cornered. She was furious at being rendered a punchline for comedic fodder, but the studio insisted she maintain silence. Insiders leaked that her contract supposedly guaranteed certain promotional events, and by canceling them, Disney might be in breach. Some speculated that her representatives were preparing for legal action, a move that would create an even larger wedge between the actress and her employer. If Zegler truly believed she was being muzzled, that sense of betrayal could harden into serious mistrust. Meanwhile, Gal Gadot, originally touted as the big selling point for older fans, stayed relatively quiet. She attended certain events without Zegler, answered questions politely, and generally sidestepped any mention of drama this created. A new wave of speculation: was Gadot so frustrated that she had simply checked out of the press obligations? Or was she contractually obligated to say as little as possible about the meltdown? Nobody knew for sure, but the absence of any unified front from the film's cast was noticeable. Where you typically expect a dynamic, star-studded marketing campaign, you got scattered appearances and a leading actress who seemed to have vanished. All of this chaos spotlighted a bigger question: where does the line between innovative adaptation and disrespectful reimagining lie for years? Critics have faulted Disney for simply remaking old properties with minimal creativity. But with Snow White 2025, the studio might have veered far in the opposite direction, upending core elements that made the story legendary. Adding fuel to the fire, Zegler's repeated negative references to 1937 sensibilities left fans feeling that the entire project was built on an assumption that the original film was more problem than masterpiece. This approach came across as ungrateful to many, especially older generations who grew up adoring the earliest full-length Disney feature. The meltdown grew so vast that even casual moviegoers became aware of it. The hashtag Snow White fiasco hashtag popped up on Twitter, and debates broke out on forums everywhere. From pop culture websites to Reddit, people debated whether they should even bother watching the film when it released, with a significant contingent vowing to boycott. Others urged the critics to wait for the finished product, arguing that perhaps the final cut would skillfully blend modern values with classic charm. Yet even those who wanted to give the film a fair shot worried that the behind-the-scenes drama and negative press were overshadowing any potential brilliance. Then came speculation about the film's release date. Originally slated for one date, it got shifted once. Insiders now suspected it might shift again, as Disney grew nervous about the potential box office blowback. Delaying a film can be strategic: let the storm die down. Release a new trailer with carefully chosen footage and hope that public sentiment improves. But the risk is that the hype machine also loses steam and fans become more convinced the project is a mess. Each day that passed without official clarification from Disney fueled speculation that the studio was in panic mode. Some watchers pointed out that historically, South Park often cements public perception of controversies. When the show parodies something, it can become the definitive comedic take, forever shaping how viewers remember that topic. Take the show's jabs at certain celebrities in the past. Many fans still reference South Park's portrayal as the first thing they think of. This spelled trouble for Zegler, who was painted as an egocentric star proclaiming that only she could save the film from its archaic roots. If that portrayal stuck, it could tarnish her image for years, making her seem high maintenance or dismissive of beloved stories. Corporate insiders admitted that responding directly to South Park was historically a losing battle. If Disney tried to release a statement condemning the episode, it might only invite more mockery. At the same time, some felt that refusing to say anything whatsoever left the impression that Rachel Zegler was being hung out to dry by neither defending nor disavowing her comments. The company seemed to reinforce that everything she said was problematic enough to be worth silencing. From a public relations standpoint, it was a lose-lose scenario. Meanwhile, leaks from the Snow White set indicated a tense atmosphere. Crew members reported confusion over exactly what version of the story they were filming, as rewrites kept rolling in. Scenes that once focused on Snow White's leadership might have been softened. Moments that gave the prince a small but meaningful role were rumored to be added back in. No one was sure if these adjustments were genuine creative choices or desperate attempts to appease outraged fans. If they were the latter, it might come across as more disingenuous than any initial approach. On social media, Rachel Zegler posted cryptic messages that many interpreted as venting her frustration. Some fans argued that these posts hinted she was referencing the South Park fiasco or the general negativity swirling around her. With each tweet or comment, new speculation arose. Was she doubling down on her stance? Or was she seeking sympathy from an audience that had largely turned against her? The level of scrutiny was so intense that even a simple like on Twitter could spark fresh controversy. While all of this played out, entertainment journalists noted how unbelievably fast a single actress's comments had spiraled into a corporate meltdown. They cited this as a prime example of Hollywood's reboot culture going awry, where balancing respect for original material with modern updates becomes a delicate dance. One misstep can appear to be an insult to the source, and when that source is something as culturally significant as Snow White, the Seven Dwarfs, backlash can be massive. By the time the dust settled, or rather, by the time the story paused, in its ongoing swirl, Rachel Zegler's reputation had taken a beating. She went from a promising young star to someone overshadowed by accusations of arrogance and disrespect toward a cherished Disney film. Yet, defenders insisted she was simply championing a more empowered female character, and that critics were overreacting to a few sound bites. Others argued it wasn't her passion for modernization that caused trouble, but the mocking tone she used to describe the original. Bob Iger's leadership also came under fire as critics asked why Disney hadn't managed the star's public image more proactively. The fiasco called into question Disney's entire strategy for reboots, with some suggesting the company had grown complacent, believing nostalgia alone could carry these films. If Snow White 2025 failed at the box office, it might serve as the final wake-up call that Disney's approach to reviving old properties needed a major overhaul. In the end, the reason this story resonates so strongly is that it cuts to the heart of how modern audiences want their classics treated. Some want them preserved in amber, unchanged, a testament to cinematic history. Others crave bold reimaginings that speak directly to the values of the present day. Disney's live-action Snow White sits squarely on that fault line, and Rachel Zegler, whether by chance or by choice, finds herself at ground zero, absorbing the brunt of the fallout. However the final film turns out, the South Park parody will remain an indelible chapter in its journey, an emblem of how pop culture can take a divisive moment and spin it into a comedic event that shapes public perception. If the film flops, people might cite that parody as one of many reasons audiences lost interest. If, against all odds, it succeeds, it could stand as a curious footnote proof that massive controversy doesn't always doom a project. At this moment, though, with the comedic ridicule fresh in fans' minds, Disney is left in crisis management mode. Rachel Zegler is presumably feeling cornered, and the future of Snow White 2025 hangs precariously in the balance. Will the final product bring a refreshing new voice to an 86-year-old classic? Or will it be overshadowed by the swirling negativity and comedic jabs that have already consumed the public discourse? Only time and perhaps box office results will tell. But one thing is clear, this saga has redefined the stakes for Disney's remake formula, making it a cautionary tale of what happens when modernization meets a fandom deeply protective of its cherished past. Ultimately, we're all left waiting to see if the conversation can shift from controversy to content. Can the movie itself, whenever it releases, transcend the headlines? Will fans be able to watch it without recalling the tidal wave of drama that preceded it? For Rachel Zegler, this is a crucial question. She may move on to other projects, but the memory of Snow White and its controversies will follow her, at least in the near term. For Bob Iger and Disney, the stakes might be even higher. A brand once synonymous with magic is now grappling with the question of how to adapt classic stories without alienating the very audiences that keep their legacy alive. In any case, there's no denying that this controversy has already etched itself into popular culture. Memes, hashtags, and South Park sketches have a way of leaving deep impressions, and this fiasco checks every box for a modern entertainment firestorm. While we wait for the eventual release or potential postponement of Snow White 2025, the rest of us can only watch as the narrative continues to unfold, uncertain whether a redemption arc might emerge, or if the meltdown will remain the film's defining legacy for years to come.